Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Bobbi Mahlab. I am the co-founder of Mentor Walks with Adina Jacobs, and we're delighted to welcome you to our conversation series today, talking about recession-proofing your finances. Before I introduce the fabulous Kate McCallum, I would like to acknowledge that we are standing on the traditional owners of the land across Australia and to pay our deepest respects to the elders, past, present and emerging. Today, Kate McCallum is going to take us through all the things we need to know about managing our money through recession. I've known Kate for years. She is one of the most fabulous people with incredible knowledge about money. She comes from a background of financial services and has many accomplished things to her name, including being the Association of Financial Advisors Female Excellence in Advice Award winner. She is the founder and the lead of Multiforte, a fantastic wealth management company for individuals. And she is, of course, the author of The Joy of Money. Now, before we get into conversation with Kate, could I ask you all, if you're not already on mute, if you could please be on mute? And to let you know that throughout this conversation, we're going to be having 3 polls, and we'll let you know when they're coming in. Of course, would love for you to put in your answers. And at the end of today's session, there'll be 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A, and we're also asking you to put your questions in the chat function. So without further ado, Kate, welcome. Very nice to have you here. And we're going to start with the question that, given the economic downturn and recession, is it too late for us to recession-proof our finances? And what are some of the practical tips and steps we can take right now?
Well, I must start by saying that you've certainly given me high praise, and I hope I certainly can answer lots of questions about how you can improve your financial position in a recession. It's certainly really tough. And I think, you know, I would preface anything that we talk about today by saying that this pandemic is really unprecedented. And so this is not a normal recession. So a lot of the things that we talk about are just ideas for helping you. And, you know, we're all dealing with uncertainty. So I think that's an important starting place. Where I start with, whenever it comes to any sort of, you know, financial stress or strain, is what I call the 3 C's. Now, the first of those is conscious cash flow. And conscious cash flow is my word for a budget, because if I talk about budgets, everybody will reel backwards and avoid doing it. But conscious cash flow is really about saying, where is my money coming from and where is my money going to? So the first thing that you need to do is a reality check. So the most important thing is just to be really honest with yourself about where your expenditure is actually going. So do a spending analysis. No value judgment, just understand where the money's going to. And then you get to use the 3 Ds. And the 3 Ds are, can you decrease your spending? Can you defer spending? Or don't spend? So decrease is obviously things like, if you've got a utility provider, can you negotiate with them to get a better deal? I know a lot of people have succeeded in getting better mortgage rates with their banks. So anything that you can do to decrease an existing item of expenditure. Defer is about putting off expenditure from today into the future. And big ticket items make a huge difference. So a number of people that I've been working with have been talking about doing renovations or buying a new car. And we're talking about pushing those expenses out just to keep more capital and cash flow today. And then the final D, don't spend, is really being, I suppose, very careful about where you're actually spending money. And if you can avoid spending, particularly on things that don't matter that much to you. So classic examples in terms of little things are buying bottles of water when you go out, or buying lunch instead of taking lunch. But also on bigger ticket items, if you can get away with buying, not buying a second car, or if you can get away with not buying a new piece of furniture, just avoiding that expenditure can make a big difference to your cash flow. The third part of the conscious cash flow equation is what I call spending now to gain later. And so this is actually continuing to spend on certain items that are high value. And the two key ones are insurance, and particularly if you have income protection or life insurance. And the second one is anything that improves your employability or your skill set or your education. So I think they're really important things to continue to spend money on today. The second of the three C's is credit. And my advice to you is just cut up the credit card. You don't need it. There are better ways to improve cash flow than relying on credit, and the sting at the end of the tail is just not worth it. So I'm a huge believer in debit cards rather than credit cards. And the third C is to create a cash buffer. Now, generally, and in the Joy of Money, we talk about making sure that you have 6 months worth of expenses as your cash buffer. Now, if you're not there yet, you want to get there fairly quickly, then this is about doing some quick wins, like selling items that you don't really need to put money into cash. If you were planning on going traveling and you're not spending that money on travel, then it can be a good thing to pop into a cash buffer. And things like if you get, in these times, lucky enough to get a pay rise, or you get a tax credit back from your tax return, all of those things can help you to fast track your cash buffer. So they're sort of a starting point for just putting yourself in a really good place with recession, sort of nipping at our coattails at the moment.
Fantastic. So in the Joy of Money, you talk about 50 ways to be financially fit. Could you share with us some of your favourite simple tips to help us be smarter about spending?
So there's lots of these, and I seem to come up with new ones all the time, but I just wanted to share 7 of my favourites with you this evening. The first of them is very simple, and it's called Pay Yourself First. And if you think about it, what most people do is they save what's left after spending. And what this is about is actually saving first and then spending what's left over. So it's targeting a certain amount of savings each week or each month and making sure that you actually do put it aside. The same as you would if you were repaying mortgage or paying your rent. It's a non-negotiable, but you spend it on yourself. And it's a great tool for lazy budgeters as well, because you don't need to track your spending then. You can just simply spend what's left over. The second one is selective spending. And selective spending is about only spending on money on things that you truly, truly value. And in the Joy of Money, we go through an exercise where we talk about doing a values assessment and then setting out your goals. But I like to think about every dollar that I spend has to be on something that is really, really joyful for me or gives me a lot of value. So it might be, if it's discretionary spend like clothing or jewelry, but it's something that you really, really love, like a signature piece. So it's not about not spending, but being discerning and selective in your spending. The third one I love and I use frequently, and it saves me on a whole lot of impulse buying, and that's the 30-day rule. And I think I've shared this one with you before, Bobbi, but the 30-day rule is basically if you get a whim that you have to have, a new shirt or a new pair of shoes or even a new car, you have to write down this want that you have and wait for 30 days until you actually do the purchase. And of course, what happens is that, the screaming desire in the moment when you first see something, and, at the moment it's often mostly online, it actually dissipates over that 30 days. And I can tell you, 9 times out of 10, I get to the end of 30 days and I don't go ahead and actually purchase the things that I've thought about or that I've been attracted to. But that one thing that I do decide to go ahead and purchase, it's something then that I really, really love and value. And so it has an even greater sense of joy, I suppose. Another one is layering. And layering for me is how do I get the most value I possibly can from every dollar? And a great example of this is, if you think about people who like their coffee, and I love my coffee, but I'll tend not to just buy a coffee, a takeaway, and go back to the office or, go somewhere and have it. I like to think about if I'm going to have a coffee out, then I meet up with a friend or I sit in the sun. So it's getting more value out of the expenditure on the coffee than just the coffee itself. I have no spend months. So that's about not having discretionary expenditure. So you just only spend on the essentials. It's a good tool for getting that muscle of discipline working. I'd like to borrow rather than buy. So particularly for things that are not particularly valuable, but that I really need. So it might be that, I need a dress for a particular occasion and I've got a friend who's got similar tastes that I can borrow. But it just saves me expending a lot of money that I'm not going to get a great deal of value from that item. In terms of my husband, I tell him he has to borrow any of his tools. I don't know how successful I am with that one though. And my last favourite one for this evening is think about going vintage. And this is not just about buying vintage clothing, but also thinking in vintage terms. And I sort of think back to my parents, and they had a much higher value on repairing and restoring. And I think COVID's kind of brought a little more of a wave of that through. So just be more conscious about repairing or reshaping clothes. And I love a good bargain at an op shop, and you'll often see me sporting op shop clothing that I hope you can't discern from my high street clothing. So there's some of my favourites, and I'm sure you've got some too, Bobbi.
Yeah, absolutely. So we all know that we're in a time when job security is on everyone's mind. Can we switch a little bit and talk about your suggestions about how we can future-proof our careers, or recession-proof our careers, rather? And also, sorry, we've got a poll, I think, that's about to come in here too. Yeah?
We do, yeah. So we might run the poll before I answer the question, because I'm interested just to get a bit of a sense of all of our participants and how they're feeling in terms of their human capital and their jobs. So maybe if we could pop the poll up. So the question that we're interested to understand is, to what extent are you all concerned about your job security in the next 12 months? So we'll just give you a couple of moments to think about where you're at. And while we're waiting, I think, I'm certainly hearing from many people that there is some uncertainty. And I think as we go through the next few weeks, particularly until we hear the government give us a little more idea of their pathway forward in the federal budget, which is happening on the 6th of October, I think, we are in a time where we're hoping that there'll be more economic stabilisation. But it's unsure, exactly how that's going to play out. Okay, thank you. So we can see the poll results, and it's interesting there that the highest number is people who are somewhat concerned, but fortunately there's a low chance that you might actually lose your job, but a good number of people that feel quite comfortable, and also some of you, unfortunately, that are a little stuck or worried about losing your job. So I think it is an uncertain time, and it's really important for us to acknowledge that. So let me talk a little bit about this sort of concept of human capital. So human capital is really about understanding the value of your future income. And the reason I think this is so important is that a lot of people who talk about personal finance spend a lot of time about reducing expenditure. And look, let's say you've got 100,000 of expenditure, just to pick a round number. If you can save 10%, well, that's $10,000 a year. But if you think about your human capital, your upside could be far more than that. So I like to really focus on what is it that we can do to get that 10 or 20 or 30% uplift in terms of our income over our lifetime. And so that's really what this is about. And that point about the sustainability of income is also really, really important. So a lot of people get caught up in having to have a high income now, but the people who I see, who I advise, what matters the most is actually sustainable income. So being able to be employed throughout your career for as long as you wish to be, with a reasonable income along the way. So sustainable income is really important, which is why it's so important to keep refreshing and reskilling. So where can you get this sustainable income? I like to think about growth industries. So looking for industries that are likely to need your skills and capability and value your experience over the long term. Secondly, sectors that value women, and women particularly as we get older. So I think that's a really, really important one to think about and start to plan for. Sectors where cross experience and skills are valued. You also need to think about education in new areas, and that might be tech or cyber or data. I think a really, really big one is around the whole area of governance. So that's becoming really important in a lot of organisations. And then the final thing that I like to talk about is not shying away from negotiating. So one of the things that often happens when times are tough is that we think, oh gosh, we can't negotiate a pay rise, or we can't, argue a little harder for a bonus. And I would argue that we shouldn't shy away from it. We need to do our homework, and we need to demonstrate why we are in the running for a pay rise or why we should deserve that bonus. But don't just step away from it completely, because I think there are chances that we can still actually get a better remuneration outcome. Even if it's not immediate, it might be something that we can bake into a future salary improvement. The other important things for human capital is maintaining and growing networks. And I recognise that can be harder in a virtual environment, but I think it's marvellous that Mentor Walks has been able to continue to engage with all of you. And I would really, really encourage you to find ways to get as involved as you can. So just to give you an example, some of the things that I've been doing just around being very deliberate about my connections is finding people I've got things in common with on LinkedIn, and actually reaching out and asking for an opportunity to catch up over Zoom, or potentially even to have a coffee as things are relaxing. But being very deliberate and very discerning about those introductions. And I'm a great believer in daily or weekly habits. And so I have a weekly habit of making sure that I'm connecting with at least one new person in my world. And I think that's just an important thing for all of us to seek to do, to ensure that we're valuable from a work perspective. So they're probably some of my main ones, Bobbi. And as I said, I think it's great that Mentor Walks is continuing to provide a forum for people to connect.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I mean, I think networks become enormously important, particularly and I love your suggestion about consciously once a week reaching out to someone new. And Mentor Walks definitely, we're about helping women get their networks and new networks, because we know that opportunities come from networks. So just to shift.
I think sorry, just one thing I want to say on that. I was chatting to a client about this on Wednesday night. She's a lawyer who runs a very successful business, which is like a legal consulting business. And she was saying to me, but aren't you uncomfortable doing that? And my answer is yes, I am. I'm not 100% comfortable doing that reach out, but I figure if I don't ask, then the answer is always no.
Yeah, and I think that also, particularly among women, there's a bit of a misnomer that they think that network is selling yourself, that you're kind of on the make. And for me, it's not that at all. It's just about building your community. And it's about getting to know more people and them getting to know you, and it's really with no expectation other than having another good contact in your world. And I think that particularly in a virtual world, like you've suggested, so important to do that. So just to move on a little bit, Kate, there are a lot of Robinhood investors out there, which are people who are investing in shares, and we've seen it in the US in particular. It's gone wild. So my question to you is it a good time to invest in shares?
That's a very, very common question at the moment. And before I answer, again, let's jump into our second poll, because this is really just to get a sense of how people are feeling about investing in shares, and whether it's something that, it is on your mind, and what you feel about it from a risk or an interest perspective. So our question is, what's your view on investing in share markets right now? And interestingly, I think we probably would have got a different response if we'd asked this back in March, when share markets around the world went into free fall. I don't think I've ever seen them decline quite as quickly and as rapidly as they did.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I also don't think I've ever seen them recover as quickly as we've seen share markets, particularly the US and the global share market in the last few months. Oh, interesting. So our results show that many of you, nearly 60%, would like to invest in shares but are not sure where to start. Okay. And a few of you think they're a bit risky, and there's a few optimists who think it's a good time to buy. That's fabulous. Thank you. And I'm so pleased to see that there's nobody who is not prepared to invest in shares, because it's such an important part of wealth management to get the capital growth that shares offer us. So circling back to the question, is now a good time? I think I'd start by saying that buying shares is just one part of the investing story. The thing that I talk to a lot of my clients about is that shares is a component, but asset allocation is actually the key decision. So asset allocation is very, very simply putting your monies across multiple baskets. So you've heard the old adage of not putting all your eggs in one basket. So this is about spreading assets across shares, across property, across bonds, which or fixed interest, and cash. And interestingly, the research on this shows that that mix of assets that you choose, that's actually going to drive around about 90% of the returns and the risks that you experience in your investing journey. So it's really, really important to focus on that first rather than shares as your starting point. The other thing to think about when it comes to investing is that unfortunately nobody can forecast the future accurately. There's plenty of people out there who will tell you that they will. I'm not one of them, so I don't have a crystal ball, and if people do ask me about my crystal ball, my response is always that it's pretty cloudy. So if we can't see the future, then the best thing that we can do is to diversify. And diversification is really just using those various asset classes, including shares, as a way of investing. And what you've got to do when you diversify is you have to work out the amount of risk that you're comfortable with. And the way that I do this when I talk to my clients is I stress test. So I give them statistics on, in a really nasty downturn, just how much in dollar terms their investments are likely to fall. And so if we talk about the financial crisis, for example, a balanced portfolio, which is around about 60% in shares and about 40% in defensive assets like bonds and cash, that fell close to 30% in the financial crisis. Now, it made its way back up again over the following 10 years. But if you're somebody who dropped from $1 million to $700,000 is going to completely freak you out, then you need to be more conservatively invested. If you're okay with that because you know you've got a long run time horizon, then you may even want to take on a little more risk. So it's just being comfortable with how much on paper an investment can drop and being okay with staying the course. The other thing that I think about is what I call not getting sucked in by sexy. So the world of investing is full of sexy things that people promote to you, but really it should be as boring as watching paint dry. So it's a long run game. Particularly at the moment, people are very caught up in what's going to happen in the next 30 days or the next 30 weeks, when really this is about the next 30 years for most of us. Even if you're age 60, 65, and I know some of the people who've joined us are nearing retirement, you probably still have pretty close on 30 years that you need your money to support you because of just the life expectancy that women have these days. And there's also something called the white collar premium on life expectancy, which means that those of us that work in professions, and I'm sure that that's many of you on today's call, we get an extra 4 or 5 years of life expectancy just because we're in professional occupations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the statistical average for a woman's life expectancy at the moment is once we reach age 65, we can live till age 86. So that's the midpoint. But add another 4 or 5 years, and that means we're talking about 90 or 90 plus. So, it's a pretty long time. The second thing to think about with investing is that if you are not sure where to start, one of the best things that you can do is just look for low cost. So Morningstar, who's one of the reviewers of investments, has put out a fabulous financial research paper which shows that the very best investments, the most successful investments over time, are those that have the lowest cost. And in the book, In the Joy of Money, we actually include some resources where you can find low-cost index funds, and they're a great way to start investing. The other thing with getting started is a lot of people say to me, "Oh, yeah, but I'm not comfortable." And my answer to that is there's a whole bunch of things that we do in life where we start out and we're not comfortable. And it's about getting a little bit of experience so that we can build that comfort level over time. And so my advice is just to get started. It's a little bit like the Nike slogan, you know, just go ahead and do it. The easiest way for many of us is to do it through our superannuation, because that's money that we've already got invested. So we can make some choices around how our super is invested, and that can be a good way to actually try out what it feels like to play with asset allocation and investing. And then the second way to do it is to choose some low-cost retail managed funds or exchange-traded funds. And there's lots of them on offer. And again, in the book, we give some guidance on a comparison tool that you can actually use to get an idea of what's out there. So they're probably the main things, Bobbi, from an investing perspective. But I think, you know, the main thing with shares is be okay with having some shares in your portfolio. The amount of shares that you invest in is going to be determined by your risk tolerance, and that's that stress testing exercise. And then it's really just about getting started and giving it a go.
Right. So, Kate, you mentioned superannuation, and superannuation, we all know, is a word that most people black out when they hear about it. And we also know that women are highly disadvantaged in the superannuation game over their lifetime. So can you talk to us a little bit about what steps we should be taking to make the most of our super?
Yeah. And believe it or not, while most people find superannuation incredibly boring, I actually do rather like diving into this, because I think it's one of the most amazing legal tax system, tax minimization strategies that we've got available. Now, before I jump in though, again, I'd really like to do a poll, and this is our last poll for the session. But it's really just to understand how people are feeling about their superannuation at the moment. And we're just interested to understand what action you plan to take in relation to your superannuation. So whether it's something that you're actively looking at, whether you don't tune in, or whether you're likely to make some changes at the moment. I must say, Bobbi, you know, interestingly, I'm finding that women in general, I'm finding an increasing interest in superannuation. And I think, you know, that's a really, really positive thing. And I don't know whether the downturns had a contribution to that or not.
Yeah, it's interesting. And tell me, the data about the people who are taking out their super, which they've been allowed to do under COVID, does that have a gender bias to it? Is that information available?
I'm not aware of a gender bias. I am aware that it's often people with low super balances who have been withdrawing their funds. So in many ways, the people who can least afford to. And we also know that the purpose for which that money has been spent has been a lot of discretionary items, but worst of all, would you believe, gambling.
Yeah.
So if I look at the discretionary items like purchases of cars, motorbikes and boats, and the gambling, I would say that in fact the gender bias is probably more to male than female. So I'm truly hoping that the women have been a little more sensible.
Okay.
So with our poll results, I'm really, really pleased actually that most of you are checking your balance, but not likely to make any major changes. And some of you are interested in switching to growth investments, but it appears that there's not people who are just knee-jerk reaction jumping to more defensive investments, and some of you that are a little bit worried and not sure what to do. So let's jump in and talk a little bit more about super. And if this is one that you have more questions on, because many people often do, it's quite a complex area, then I'd encourage you when we get to our Q&A to actually jump in and ask questions. The starting point, I think, Bobbi, with super is to understand that superannuation is just a tax structure. So it's no different really to a company or a trust, where it's a box that our money is invested into, and that tax structure can give us some benefits. And that's one of the reasons that I'm very conscious of suggesting to people that they do what they can to maximise their superannuation. So again, the key things that we talk to clients about are make sure you've got the right asset mix, and we talked about that just a moment ago. Make sure you've got low fees. So the average superannuation fee in Australia is about 1%. If you're paying more than that in total fees on your superannuation, you're paying too much. And there's many, many funds out there that can actually offer very, very attractive fees. Interestingly, there's no blanket recommendation, because some funds will suit investors with lower balances and some funds will be better for members with higher balances. So you actually do need to phone your superannuation fund and ask the question. So I encourage you to take that as one action out of today, is make sure you know exactly what you're paying for your super. And if you're paying more than 1%, then find a new superannuation fund.
Okay.
Now, the super withdrawal, which we talked about, if it is something that anybody has taken advantage of, I would caution you against treating that as a permanent withdrawal from super. And so think about it as a loan. So if you've taken out the $10,000, then when you have better cash flow or you're in a better balance sheet position, pay it back into your superannuation so that you restore your super balance to where it was. Because I think, as you said, Bobbi, particularly for women, superannuation is such an important part of our wealth building. So the main reason for suggesting superannuation is that once the money's inside super, the maximum tax that you pay on earnings is 15%. And that's far, far more attractive than your personal marginal tax rate for most of us. So as soon as you earn under current tax rates over $37,000, you're paying 32.5% in tax, not even counting the Medicare levy. So that's quite a big difference. So those tax savings actually help you to supercharge your savings over time. The other thing I wanted to mention very briefly is self-managed super funds. So again, it's one of those areas that a lot of people get very attracted to self-managed super. They can be really, really helpful. They have a lot of flexibility, but unless you have a fairly sizable super balance, they can be quite an expensive route. And there can be other options. So there's a lot of superannuation wrap accounts which are available these days, which offer an equal number of investment options and give you good flexibility around your superannuation investing. So it might not be the best route. So don't just go into it automatically. Again, just make sure you do your homework. And then I think finally, the last point that I wanted to make around superannuation is that it's a gateway to accessing a tax-free pension. And pensions are super, super attractive. So once you're eligible to commence a personal pension and account-based pension, all of the money in that pension is completely tax-free. This is about the only completely tax-free environment that I know about. So you do need to meet what's called a retirement condition of release. And I don't want to go into great detail because it's only for a segment of people who are listening. But once you reach age 65, you automatically reach a retirement condition of release. And so you can start an account-based pension. And if you reach age 60 and you cease any employment arrangement, then you might be eligible to commence an account-based pension and get this tax-free superannuation money. So that means if you stop one job and start another, you could be eligible for a pension. Or if you've got multiple income streams, so I've got a number of clients who are board directors, for example, and if they've come off one board, then that can actually mean that they've triggered this condition of release and they're eligible to commence a pension, even though they might have continuing income streams from other sources of employment. So there's a whole lot of rules and regulations around superannuation. it is actually far, far more complex than most people realise. There's a lot of traps. So it is an area where I genuinely recommend that people seek personal advice, either from your own superannuation fund, or if you've got a financial advisor, to actually seek personal advice for that one.
Okay. Yeah, it is hugely complicated, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to wrap your head around it and to stay interested in it. But when Paul Keating talks about it, that's always interesting. So, and look, on to our final topic, which is about insurance. And because it is our final topic, I'd just like to invite everyone, if you have questions, please put them into chat, because we will have time to get to a number of them. So, Kate, in terms of insurance, what do we need to be thinking about when it comes to personal insurance?
So this goes into the same category for many of us as superannuation, as being one of the most boring things that you could talk about. And in fact, it's probably even worse, because it's something that the purpose of insurance is basically to help us in the event of, you know, horrible things happening. So it's not something that most people really like talking about. But it's important that we do remember that that's exactly the role of insurance. Its purpose is to give us a financial buffer if anything happens and we, you know, die prematurely, we're ill or injured for an extended period of time, we suffer a traumatic illness like a cancer, a heart attack, or a stroke, which are the three biggies for trauma or critical illness. And so the role of insurance really is to be there in case something happens. But you know what? We should be really, really happy if we get through our whole journey in life and we've paid our insurance premiums and we never ever have to claim. I've never ever heard anybody who says, yay, you know, I had insurance and yes, I got cancer. You know, so that is not a place that any of us want to be. So, you know, we're very, very lucky ducks if we get through life and we don't have to worry about ever having claimed on insurance. It truly, truly is a backstop for us to give us peace of mind that if anything were to happen that was untoward, that we've got that support. The insurance policy that I think is really, really important, and it's one that everybody, regardless of their circumstances, should consider, and that's income protection. So income protection's purpose is if you are ill or injured for an extended period of time and you can't work in your occupation, then you basically get a payment of 75 or up to 85% of your pre-disability income. And you can actually take those policies out so that they pay right up to age 65 and some of them up to age 70. So it's a very, very valuable form of insurance. The other good thing with income protection is that the premiums, the costs that you pay, are mostly tax deductible. So you might look at the number and go, oh my gosh, that's awful, but you can actually claim it back on your tax. Mm. The other key thing that I like to think about with insurance is not just about insurance for yourself, but insurance for the people in your world who they don't have their cover in place. They're going to impact you. So this could be, for example, if you've got godchildren, making sure that the godchild's parents have got appropriate insurance in place. If you have siblings and they've got kids that you might become a guardian for, making sure that they've actually got appropriate insurances in place. And then the other fun one is adult children. And I know, Bobbi, you and I both have adult children who are of a similar age. But we've had circumstances with clients where an adult child has had an illness or an injury, and guess what they do? They come back home and they expect or need, you know, even if they don't expect it, they need to be supported by their parents. And this can completely derail our own financial independence and our financial retirement plans. And I know of a family where the godparents ended up looking after a young man who was 11 when his parents both died in a car accident. And yes, there was some funds provided for with life insurance, but it wasn't enough. And so they had to defer their own retirement plans to support this very, very lucky young man. But not a place that you want to be. So this is about planning for the worst and hoping that it never, ever happens.
Mm.
There's a whole lot more in the book, and again, this is a complex area and one where, you know, I generally say to people it's a good one to get advice, because you don't want to be paying more than you need to for insurance premiums, but you do want to make sure that you get this jigsaw puzzle of insurance set up really well.
Terrific. And life insurance, of course, is a big one. I'll start with that question, Kate. What's your view of life insurance per se?
So I think life insurance is a really important one for anybody who has financial dependence. So if you're flying solo and you don't have anybody who's dependent on you, then you actually don't need life insurance. The other case that, you know, I've got some clients who are in a circumstance where they're lucky to have repaid their mortgage. They have sufficient financial assets that if anything happened to them, their financial dependence would actually be okay. And in that case, you don't need life insurance either. I think the big one with life insurance too, Bobbi, is to make sure that in your superannuation, you don't have default insurance that you actually don't need. So a lot of the superannuation funds have had a default life and total and permanent disability insurance in place. And while it's great for people who otherwise may not have it, it's not so good if you're paying premiums for insurance that might not actually be valuable for you.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. So look, at this point, we've had a number of questions. So I might start with those, if that's okay. The question is, I recently went from part-time work to full-time work. Should I increase my super? Does the tax incentives take into account my income only or that of my husband's as well? She says, I'm 95 and he's 125 and we have 2 teenagers. I'm sure those figures, I'm not sure that you are 95 and he's 125, but Kate, do you get the gist of the question?
I do, and I'm hoping that you're under age 67 because that makes it much easier to contribute to super, or at least under age 74. There are some age-based limits to superannuation investing. So if you're 90 or 100, you're not able to contribute to super. But assuming that you are in fact younger than that. With superannuation, as you know, we have the Superannuation Guarantee, and Paul Keating, who you mentioned before, had a lot to do in authoring this amazing superannuation system that we have. So that super guarantee at the moment is 9.5%. And even though there's been some noises about that increasing, not ratcheting up towards 12%, I would anticipate that in the current environment, that probability is pretty low. Mm-hmm. So having said that there's already this automatic super guarantee payment, if you've moved from part-time to full-time and you have surplus cash flow, you've actually got some funds available that you could contribute, then absolutely I would recommend maximising your pre-tax contributions to super. Now the limit for those is $25,000 a year. And that includes the super guarantee that you're receiving from your employer, or if you're a business owner that you might put in as your own super guarantee. But you can top up, and I certainly recommend, if you've got the cash flow to do it, and you're planning on making sure that you're topping up for retirement, it's a brilliant way to actually boost your retirement savings. In relation to the question about the income and whose income is assessable, it's only the individual's income. So superannuation is a very individualised calculation. So it's my income and my super contributions that are the calculation.
Okay, terrific.
Have I answered that question?
I think so. Good job. The next question is, how does changing superannuation funds affect your insurances?
This is a really important question because with many superannuation funds, whether there's default insurance in place, you will lose that if you flip superannuation funds. Again, you may have some terms that can be rolled over, but it gets a bit complex. So it's important to look at this. If there's any reason why it might be difficult for you to automatically get insurance, so you've got a medical condition or you've had some sort of recent medical event, that might be a consideration in not moving all of your money out of one super fund into another. Now, having said that, if you do want to retain insurance in a previous superannuation fund, you need to check with that super fund what it is that you need to do to keep the insurance in place. So you might be able to just keep a minimum balance as long as you're making some regular contributions in there, and it might not need to be your primary super fund. So if it's an expensive fund, but you want to keep the insurance, then you might just hang on to the fund, keep a minimum balance, make whatever the minimum contributions are just to preserve that insurance. If, on the other hand, you're happily able to get new insurance in the new fund, then I wouldn't worry about it. I just make sure I get the new insurances set up before I do the rollover. So make the new super fund, get the new insurances in place, and then finalise the rollover after that. So there's a sequence of events that you want to get the new insurances in first.
Okay, wonderful. So if you have discretionary money, where is the best place to put it at the moment? Mortgage, shares, bonds, or fixed investments? What's your view?
So this is a really tricky one because I can't give anybody personal advice, and nothing that we've spoken about today should be taken as personal advice. It's all just very general. So the answer is it depends. It depends on your tax rate. So if you're paying a higher marginal tax rate, the thing that you need to think about is when you invest in your own name, any income that you earn or capital gains that you have are taxed at that marginal tax rate. And so if that's 47 cents in the dollar, that takes a lot out of your return. The second thing to think about is if you've got a mortgage rates at the moment are pretty low, but that could still be a better return after tax on an after tax basis than investing in your own name. Superannuation, because it's a concessional tax rate, can be very attractive. But again, it depends on what your personal marginal tax rate is. So if you've got a very high personal marginal tax rate, then super can be really attractive. What I often say is the answer to these questions is often not binary. It's not this or that. It's maybe a little bit of everything. And so often with my clients, I'll recommend that we have a dual strategy of doing some into super, particularly if it's pre-tax money, and some to pay off the mortgage. But as I said, it's horses for courses. It depends where you're at a personal level, and you probably need to get some advice if it's sort of not automatically apparent where the best place to be is with that one.
It's interesting because the question that's coming up a number of times here is, am I better off paying down my mortgage or beefing up my super? And two questions. One has come from someone over 60, hello Jane, and another for someone who's in their mid-40s.
So a good rule of thumb is if you can contribute the money to super on a pre-tax basis, and you would otherwise pay a high marginal tax rate, then you get an immediate tax saving. And then, as I noted before, once the money's inside superannuation, it's only taxed at up to 15%. And once you get near retirement or able to meet a condition of release, then it basically moves into a zero tax environment. So that chain of events, all of those tax savings, they can be very, very attractive and can make super a great way to go. As I said before, because mortgage rates are also at a very, very low rate, the cost of having debt is just historically very, very low. We do need to be mindful that once you invest inside superannuation, the variability of returns will be there. So you need to take that into consideration as well. But certainly as a rule of thumb, pre-tax super can be really attractive. But it's, again, I can't tell you what the best answer is without knowing your personal circumstances. So it's a little bit tricky for me to give an answer. Having said that, Bobbi, a few years ago, I did a piece for the Financial Review, and I gave them a table that I'd developed, which was a bit of a rule of thumb, depending on what your tax rate was and what the mortgage rate was, where the break-even points were. So I'm happy to dig that up, and I'm happy to share it with you, and you can perhaps send it out to the Mental Walks community.
Thanks, that sounds great, Kate. There's another question here, again, around asking advice about whether to take out a loan for a mortgage at a time when job security is unknown. Can you give advice or thoughts around this?
The tagline for our business is live well, sleep well. So a lot of my thinking around things like taking out mortgages is the sleep well actually is a really, really big factor. So it might not sound like financial advice, but if you make any decision, whether it's taking out a mortgage or investing in shares, anything that you do that's going to cause you not to sleep well, that's going to have longer term financial impacts than any immediate financial decision. So I think if you're worried about job security, now's not the time to take out a mortgage. You just don't want to layer up that financial stress. Interestingly on this one, Bobbi, and I don't know what this person's circumstances are, but there's a lot of talk about how buying is the only way to go and that renting is a costly exercise. And I really, really challenge that. And I've challenged it for many years because I've seen circumstances where renting actually makes an enormous amount of sense. Last year, EY, Ernst & Young, put out a fabulous paper which actually did the numbers on the capital cities in Australia and whether it made sense to rent or buy. And what they found was that the economics of each actually adjust so that over time, neither one nor the other is actually a better financial outcome. And so I was really, really pleased that somebody had done the numbers for me to demonstrate on that large aggregate basis that renting or buying, it really doesn't matter. And so if buying a place is going to put you under financial stress, then rent, because renting can give you a lot of flexibility. If for some reason you lose your job and you need to pay less rent, you've got more opportunity to actually get out of a rental agreement. Still might not be pretty, but you can get out of a rental agreement more gracefully than you can negotiate out of having purchased a home that you just simply can't afford.
Great. Okay. There's a question here from Aisha, which is, can you please give me an idea what an average super balance for a 35-year-old should be, what the average balance for a 35-year-old is?
We get asked, it's interesting, we got asked a lot of questions about, what benchmarks, where should I be at a particular point in time? And, it's actually a really difficult one because, again, particularly for women, we have very, very different career trajectories generally than men. I know, like, I can speak for myself. I had 2 children. I worked part-time for a period of time. I took time out to study. I worked in roles that were deliberately interesting but low paid so that I could build my skill set in certain areas. And so I certainly didn't have, what I had anticipated I should have in my super balance by the time I was 35. So look, it's a really tricky one. I would say that as a helpful benchmark, I think it's useful just to say, well, if you think of your earnings over the period of time from the time that you started working to age 35, if you have 10% of your earnings, that's probably not a bad benchmark to use, just because you should have had Superannuation Guarantee paid for you. But around about 10% is a good number, and that way I'm not taking into account any particular growth or, not getting into complexity of calculating taxes or costs. But yeah, that's probably a good rule of thumb. There was a book written many, many years ago called The Millionaire Next Door. It was based on some work done in the US around what millionaires really look like. And I can tell you, they're not the people who live in fancy suburbs and drive fancy cars. You often can't pick them. But they had some benchmarks in that book, and I looked at those, and I actually even thought they were probably a little optimistic, again, particularly for women because of our career trajectories and the changes that happen with those.
Okay. Now I'm conscious of time and we've got time for 2 more questions. This one is, do you recommend doing your tax return yourself online, or do you think it's better to get assistance?
I think if your circumstances are simple and straightforward, then doing it online probably works. My experience with tax accountants is that if you ask them the right questions, quite often the assistance is well worth it, and you'll get extra benefits in your tax return to pay you back for the cost of getting some advice. But generally, the more complex things become, the more value you're likely to receive from having expert advice. So it's a bit of a value equation, is that one. Bobbi, I noticed there's a question in there on index funds, and if you don't mind, can I quickly jump in and answer that, because I just want to apologise for using a bit of jargon, because I try very, very hard not to do it. Index funds are funds where there's no portfolio manager, no individual actively making choices about the shares or the bonds that fund is buying or selling. They basically track an index like the stock exchange, the ASX 200 or the S&P 500 in the US, which is the equivalent of the stock exchange here. But they basically track the largest companies in the case of a share fund. So the top 200 companies in Australia is what the ASX 200 represents. And that's really all an index fund is. But there's some very, very good information available online if you want to Google index funds. They've become increasingly popular because A, they're low cost, and B, many active managers have failed to outperform index funds. And so you don't need to go looking for the best fund manager or follow the league tables. It makes it a very, very easy way to invest.
Okay. Because of the time, and I'm sure everyone wants to get to their dinner or home or whatever on time, I'll scrap the last question, but I will finish with this. Kate, if there were 3 things that you suggest every woman listening to this webinar should do, what would they be?
I think number 1 is be really, really serious about your human capital. So make sure you invest in sustainable skills that mean that you can continue to work over your lifetime for as long as you want. And that's, you know, we know from works like The 100-Year Life, which was written by 2 London Business School professors, that the half-life of skills is now only 5 years, which means that anything that we learned 10 years ago, only half of it is now relevant. So we need to keep upskilling and building our human capital. And as we talked about before, that's not just work-based skills, it's also making sure that you've got good networks, because those networks are going to help you enormously in maintaining sustainable employment over your lifetime. So that's number 1. Number 2 is make sure that you really, really understand your values and your goals. And so this is about getting rid of comparison, not keeping up with the Joneses, but being really true to who you are. Because once you work that out, it makes it so easy to say no to spending on things that are not valuable, and it makes your life so much more fulfilling. And, you know, fundamentally, my job as a financial advisor is to help people find the things that are truly going to give them a joyful life, and then to put the finances in place behind it so that they can achieve them. And then the third one is to really take stock of where you are now, because once you take stock and you understand what your income is, what your expenditure is, what your balance sheet, your assets and your liabilities look like, you're then going to be in the very, very best position to work out what you need to do going forward and to put in place some really, really strong financial habits towards meeting those goals.
Fabulous. Thank you. Now, certainly the bell near me is clanging for 6. I know a number of people will want to get access to your book, The Joy of Money, and also there are questions about whether you take individual appointments. How do people get your book? And also, do you take individual appointments?
Thank you, Bobbi. I'm going to start with the second question first. Unfortunately, I'm at capacity, so I've made a deliberate decision to only work with a certain number of clients, which is really challenging because I want to help a lot more people, which is actually the reason for writing the book. In terms of finding somebody who can help you, in the book we talk about, you know, do ask people that you trust. So people who are similar to you, so not just family and friends, but people who are in similar circumstances. And so again, networks like this one are a helpful way to actually say, you know, who do you know that I might be able to see? I've also got in the book a whole range of questions that you can use to evaluate a financial advisor. So, you know, I do recommend making sure that you go in prepared. And interestingly, most of the women who I've ever met are generally the most prepared in terms of wanting to know all of the things about me that make sure that we're a good fit, because it often is a long-term relationship. In terms of the book, this is what it looks like, if you're wondering. We're delighted that it's not only, we believe, helpful, but also a really joyful looking book. We have sold out at a lot of the online retailers. So I understand that Big W actually still has copies online. And if for any reason you're having difficulty getting hold of it, then I would encourage you to contact my assistant, Casey, because we do have some books available as well, and we can organise to get those to you. So just to do the purchase directly with us. So that's possible as well. And I think we're going to put Casey's details up for people.
Yeah, Joni's going to put it in the chat function right now. So just if you would like to order the book, everyone, just email Casey and she'll organise that for you. So Kate, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your insights with us. It is unbelievably important for women to take care of their money and really appreciate not just the time you've spent with us, but the work you do to help women take care of themselves and their families. So with enormous gratitude to you, not just for today, but for what you do in the world for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bobbi, and it's been an absolute pleasure to join you. And I can see all these lovely thank yous coming through in the chat. So I truly hope that the discussion is valuable, and I really do encourage everybody, not only for themselves to make sure that they do take steps towards their own financial well-being, but you know, share it with your daughters, share it with your friends, and let's just make sure that women are in a much better place.
Okay, and just finally, if anyone missed the email address for Cassie, we will also put it on the relevant social channels for you. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to you joining us for some of the other webinars we're holding, and we'll be in touch with you by email and on social about when they are and what they are. Thank you so much.